I think in this industry, it's usually someone that's in the industry already or wants to get in the industry, recently got their certifications, trainings, things like that.
Yeah, and I even work with like military spouses who, they move every 3 years. And so like
Yeah,
instead of just shutting everything down, if they had those assets, they could at least make some money off of it.
totally. Yeah, they really could.
Hey everyone, it's Jake Randolph here. I'm very excited to have Jessica on the podcast. This is Jessica Fialkovich. She's actually the author of Getting the Most for Selling Your Business. I actually read this book yesterday. It's amazing. It's a topic that I've mentioned a couple times on here before, but something I really want to dive into it. So Jessica, if there's anything, if you want to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jake, for having me on the show. I'm really excited about our conversation today. I call myself a business exit expert. So basically, what I help people do is figure out what their company is worth, what they want to sell it for in the future, and then how to get there through my company Exit Factor. My background is I've been in the business brokerage and M&A industry for over 10 years. I've bought and sold 5 of my own companies, and I've helped about 600 people exit their companies through my 10-year career.
Yeah, I was reading some of the stories in your book and definitely impressive resume. And for those listening, whether you are just starting your business or whether you've been doing this for a while, I think this is applicable to everyone because at some point we're all going to get old or something's going to happen and we're not always going to be able to be, the active business owners that we are now, whether we sell the business or do something. And so this is a great topic you guys need to start learning about. And so here we are. So let's start with, long-term game plan because I want to make this relevant to my audience. So how soon in advance should they be, creating a sellable asset or a business that they, if they're thinking about selling, or even if they've never thought about it, how soon in advance should they start planning?
Yeah, I mean, so it's the typical answer, right? It should be day one when you start your business.
Hmm.
So a lot of us think like, we're going to have this long-term plan to sell our business, but in the real world, like I'd say 95% of the people that I work with, they have to sell or exit their business, which means close or walk away or give it to somebody else for a reason they don't expect, which is just
Hmm.
life, right? And it can be things like another opportunity, it could be a spouse having to relocate, it could be burnout, illness, unfortunately we've dealt with death in some cases. But I think just at any time, we really should be prepared to be able to exit our business or transition it to somebody else with getting something for it, right? And we just don't
Yeah.
know when that day is. So it's day one, start planning. And if you didn't start planning day one, then, today is the day.
Yeah, because unfortunately, with like people don't realize businesses are assets. Like a lot of people think like, oh, I'm going to do this service, and then when I get tired of it, I'm going to shut down. And unfortunately, as a lot of businesses do that because they didn't plan ahead. So, let's say we have a small business owner right now, they have 1 or 2 employees. What can they be doing right now to get their business ready?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with this. First, it's just the mindset shift. Is like thinking about like somebody else is going to take this over at some point, and even just that mindset shift, like you'll do things differently. So, like one of the things we recommend is you document what you do. You have processes and systems in place,
Hmm.
and if you're thinking about, hey, someone's going to step into my shoes down the road, then you'll automatically do that. It's almost like, say you had to take a sabbatical or you got the opportunity to go travel to Europe and you're going to have a friend take over your business for the next 6 months. Like, what would you tell them? Like, how would you tell them to run that business? So that's the first thing is like that total mindset shift. The second thing is shifting your mindset around finances. So, finances, sometimes I find like it can be a 4-letter word with entrepreneurs,
Hmm.
but really keeping clean books and records and making sure all of your revenue and expenses are documented in an easy system like QuickBooks. Same thing, mindset shift around finances is thinking about like your banker is going to come and like want to inspect your business at any given time. Like just run your business like that. Run your business like you're going to go apply for a loan and just keep clean books and records at any given time. Those two things are huge game changers, even if the business is still reliant on you and it's just you or maybe you and one other person. The next level, and like I know you've talked a lot about this on your show, Jake, is like making the business not about you or putting systems in place so you don't have to do everything. That's kind of the next level. But if you just want big impact today, it's like, hey, just start documenting what you're doing so you can actually transition that knowledge. And second, have those finances in order so that when a buyer or someone else comes to see what do you have of value, it's very easy for them to assess.
Yeah, and that's such a tough struggle for even me because like I know the best way to do marketing a lot of times to create that personal connection, but then I'm like, well, if the business is all about me or like everything, then how do I make that sellable? And so I think that's the biggest challenge for me and a lot of other, solopreneurs out there.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, and I think sometimes we get wrapped up into that a little bit more and think like, well, somebody wouldn't want to do business without me,
Right.
and if you do create systems where business is coming in without you, right? Like some of the marketing systems that you put in place for your clients, like so business is coming in. You've got a website, you've got social media, business is coming in. One of the permanent makeup artists that I worked with as a client a number of years ago, she was out of Denver and she had the opportunity to move to Austin and she could have transitioned her business. Like I came in through referral and she got a lot of things through web campaigns. Like, look, honestly, if I would have landed her business six months later and somebody new was sitting in that seat and said, this person left, I took over for them. I have the same training. I have the same, skill set they have. I still would have kept my business with them. So it is definitely something of value, even if it's just about you. Now, the next level, making it more valuable, is obviously removing yourself from some of that marketing and things, but you can still sell a business that is structured around your persona, your brand image, anything like that.
Yeah, and I think you even mentioned in the book, like even if you don't sell the whole business, there's so many assets of whether it's a customer list, which, I've been harping on this all year because a lot of my clients don't even keep up with their customer list. I'm like, you got to keep up with that.
Yeah.
But what are some of the other assets they can, besides like machines is obvious, but like,
Yeah.
what are some other things that they should be keeping account of?
Yeah, so you've got your hard assets like your machines and this in permanent makeup, that's actually very important, right? So having those documented, keeping them well maintained so they can continue to function for a new owner. And then you have what we call intangible assets. So that's your brand recognition. So that could be your website, your social media platforms. It could be your customer list. And that's where maybe you have a specialized marketing system that generates leads for you. That's all like what we call intangible assets. So having those things updated in order, and then if it is like a process like well documented, really does build value in the company. And that's where, yeah, maybe the brand is about you, maybe it's not super big, but I do tell people if the day comes and you have to make a choice to exit your business, is it worth getting, even if you got a few $1,000s for it versus closing the door? Isn't that like just a better scenario, right?
Yeah. And I mean, this sounds grim, but I always think about what if something were to happen to me or I die? Like, do I have an asset that either my wife could run or sell? And so these are all important questions to start asking.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even like, I mean, like we won't go super grim, but like, how does somebody step in, right? Like the day
Yeah.
after, and like I said, we have dealt in cases where people have passed away unexpectedly, or maybe they have a severe health disruption and a spouse or, a son, daughter, niece, nephew has to step in to run the day to day. And like, they have no idea what to do. So yeah, grim, but thinking about like long term and your eventual exit from this earth, like that planning's never a bad idea, just to have some stuff written down, documented, so if somebody does have to step in and take over, they can.
Yeah. One of the things that surprised me in the book was you mentioned the timeline. So you said, minimum usually 6 months, sometimes up to 2 years to really, sell a business.
Yeah. So the average, it is pretty long. The average business takes 9 months to sell right now. And that's if everything's in order, right? That's
Hmm.
if like everything we already talked about, everything that's already good to go. And you're going to have a fairly easy time attractive buyers into the marketplace. If you do have a business that's in a niche industry, you're in a smaller market, or you haven't prepared for sale, that could take 2 or more years to find the right buyer, to get the right deal done. The key is that if you do some preparation work ahead of time, you have this plan done, you have a strategy that you're executing, that the business can be transitioned, that process can move a lot faster, because the bulk of the process is finding the right buyer. It's not
Right.
like real estate. Like there's not hundreds or thousands of buyers lined up for any business, there's a handful, and finding those handful of people as quickly as possible is the name of the game.
Hmm. Another interesting point you made is like real estate goes up and down with markets, whereas, selling a business, like if it's what it's worth last year, it's probably worth, this year is, I mean, there's other factors, but can you kind of go into that?
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. It's a pretty stable market over time. So, with the exception of like 2010, 2011, which was business valuations dipped a little bit lower, and business valuations tend to lag behind the macroeconomics about 2 to 3 years, because most businesses are valued over a 3-year history of earnings. So if you take that into consideration, like a business or an industry or an economy has to have like 3 really bad years in order to drastically devalue the company. And if you look at most recessions, they don't last that long. So I think that's why it stabilizes pretty quickly. Obviously, 08, 09, 2010 was a longer recession, and that's why we saw a bit of a dip. But also, there's always people searching for businesses. So if you think about it too, say we go into a recession, right? What typically happens in a recession is job loss. So people will lose their jobs and they'll start to look for different ways to earn income. And one of those ways is to buy a business. So we actually had an influx of buyers in a recession too, so overall it's pretty stable. So you can't like time the market on the best time to sell. You can time your business and figure out when this is the best time to sell your business, but not the market or market conditions.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of people think that, to sell a business, you have to be making millions and millions. What would you say the base number is to have a good sellable asset?
So I'm in a strong believer you can sell anything. I mean, we've sold businesses or asset only sales for as little as $10,000, and we've done
Hmm.
deals up to $30 million. The average sale price, I think, so there's this website bizbuysell.com where a lot of businesses are listed. They do an insights report every quarter that's really eye opening. I think their average sale right now is just below $300,000, and the average revenue is probably in the 400 to 500,000 range, and that's the average. So think about it, that's like the millions and millions of dollars of businesses mixed with the low ones. So I don't think there's a minimum size, but I do think that you have to have a realistic valuation on your company of what you're getting out of it. Like if it's worth, $5,000 or $10,000 and you're asking a half a million, that business is never going to sell, right? So
Hmm.
it's all about being realistic with the expectations of what you're going to get out of it. And then also, like I mentioned, it's identifying, we call it the most probable buyer. Like who's actually going to buy this business? And I do talk to a lot of people that own small businesses, and they say, oh, well, my business would be perfect for this large multinational, multi-billion-dollar company. It would give them a footprint in my town and all that stuff. And the reality of it is that, most business buyers are not going to buy a company drastically smaller than theirs. They're going to buy something that's like 25% of their size, maybe 10 or 15% of their size. So if you're thinking of someone who's going to buy your business, like that's kind of the metrics you use, and not go after these big multinational companies. But yeah, it's all about finding the right expectations of what you're going to get out of it, and
Hmm.
then also identifying that most probable buyer.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say in the permanent makeup industry or the beauty industry in general, like a lot of the buyers could be somebody else in the industry. Like I know a situation where one of my friends moved from California, and so she's probably going to sell like I think it's like the lease and some equipment and the contact list of all her client database. She had a nice business in California, but she's going to sell it to someone else in that location because they're going to open up another branch. So that's just like a practical example of things I've seen.
Exactly. And then if she wanted to, she can, move to her new location and do the same thing, buy somebody
Yeah.
else's business. It's usually, I think in this industry, it's usually someone that's in the industry already or wants to get in the industry, recently got their certifications, trainings, things like that.
Yeah, and I even work with like military spouses who, they move every 3 years. And so like
Yeah,
instead of just shutting everything down, if they had those assets, they could at least make some money off of it.
totally. Yeah, they really could.
In your book, you talk a lot about financials, which you said is, a four-letter word sometime. How can they present those in the best light? I mean, I guess one bad example that I've seen is a lot of people take cash under the table. That's obviously, bad for a lot of reasons, but can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, that the cash is a good one. So yeah, it's always tempting, but we joke in the industry, you can only steal cash once, right? So you can't steal cash, not report it, and then try and claim it for value later on. So that's one of the first thing is you have to document all the revenue and expenses, right? So yes, sometimes we see cash under the table. Sometimes we also don't see expenses documented because business owners might have paid for them in cash, they might have paid for them on a personal card, anything like that. So making sure you're documenting all of your expenses. If like you have a spouse that's helping you do bookings, you should theoretically be paying that person because you'd be paying somebody else to do the same job. So documenting that stuff, having it in a system like QuickBooks is usually what we see. And for small business owners, I think it's the gold standard at this point to really document your business financials in there for something that can be transitioned to someone else. And then the last thing I'd say is just keeping them clean, meaning we talked about documenting all expenses, but not running too many personal expenses through the business. If you run too many personal expenses through the business, it affects your net profit, which is how you value a company. And it also it just looks messy, like from a buyer's perspective. It's just perception. It's not really affecting the business in any way, shape, or form, but it just looks messy. And it's hard for a buyer to unwind all those personal expenses to figure out what is the company really making.
Right. Another great point that I think a lot of people struggle with is, and you talk about this in your book, but going from, operator to, really business owner. And so can you dive into that a little bit on like special and maybe personalize it to the, permanent makeup or beauty industry, how they can possibly like kind of take a step back from their business over time?
Yeah. Yeah. And look, it's hard in this industry because I know a lot of the entrepreneurs in this industry, they're creatives. Like they
Right.
love being like behind the chair. They love doing the actual service. So I would start first by removing yourself from all other aspects of the business. So we just talked about bookkeeping. It's pretty easy to outsource your bookkeeping at this point. You can either do it through apps, technology, freelancers, things like that. So I would start documenting everything that you do on a day-to-day basis and systematically getting rid of them, from bookkeeping to marketing to reception duties, all that stuff, so that you're really only doing the work through the creative part that you love, probably, right? Most
Yep.
people that are in this industry, that's what they love. At least at that point, you've positioned the business for sale to someone else in your industry that, hey, here's a system, like here's that intangible asset that we were talking about that works without me. It just puts people in my chairs, right? It puts people in my rooms and you don't have to do any work for it. So that would be the first step that I would do in this industry. The next step is obviously bringing somebody underneath you, doing some type of apprenticeship program. We've seen apprenticeships work really well in similar industries to permanent makeup, and having somebody come up underneath you. So over time, you're handing off more and more of the business to them of executing on the services, and you're doing less and less yourself. So that's obviously what we're shooting for long term. So the eventual goal is that you're running the business and you're not actually doing anything in it. But I think the first step is just get yourself back to doing what you love. Just get back to delivering the service and have everything else in the business run without you.
100%. And if you need to outsource your marketing, I know a guy.
There you go. You should totally plug it right now. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things I loved about your book, and I'll show it again, is that it didn't have a ton of fluff in it. Like I hate books that are like 10,000 pages and have tons of like a million stories and like too much fluff. Like this book was, I think me and you have the same, I don't know, our brains work the same. I like to get straight to the point. I like to, and that's the way I like to read too. And so I really loved, your writing style.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Look, I knew who I was writing the book for. I was writing the book for small business owners. I am a small business owner. We don't have time, right?
Right.
So we don't have time. I was listening to one of your podcasts and you were saying you're reading Tony Robbins' new Life Force book. And I love Tony and I've read all of his books, but it's taking me forever to get through Life Force. I'm listening to it and it's like 24 hours or something like that, right? It's going to take me months. So I knew that was what was super important to me was that you could sit down like you did this past weekend and you could read it in one sitting. And how we structured it with the, 5 content chapters and the second half of the book is all like top 10 lists that you could just reference. Yeah. That was by design. It's just like, I want people to be able to reference this, read this in a couple hours without having to commit to, reading it for what I'm doing, my morning walk every morning for the next 6 months, right? So
Yeah, and this should be a huge compliment for you, but like I really enjoyed your book way more than Life Force because I mean it was just too fluffy. Like it was this study says this and this study says this, and so yours got to the point whereas Life Force I kind of skimmed it and I haven't even read half of it.
yeah, I feel like we would both be like the same exact disc assessment chart or something like that. Where, IDs tell us what we need to know, and we'll just move on, right?
Yep, exactly. All right, so as far as selling businesses go, like what would you say are the biggest mistakes we need to watch out for?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones, and I'd say with my experience in permanent makeup and beauty in general, this happens more frequently in this industry, is that thinking your business is not sellable. You will get something for it. If you plan in advance, like there is something of value there. Don't ever just close the doors and walk away. Even like Jake, you're talking about, and I heard you mention on a previous podcast, like the value of your list. Like, please don't just walk away. I know it may not seem like a lot of money, and you hear all these multi-million-dollar exits in the news and things like that, but $5,000 or $10,000 to you could be the difference between starting your next thing or not. It could be, tuition for your child's preschool for the next couple of years. So, to get something for it, your business is sellable. There's something of value in every business. So I think that's the biggest mistake that I see. The second biggest one is the flip side is the expectations, right? If you have someone, and this could be an advisor like me, or it could be multiple buyers, right? So I will tell you a story. It's in a different industry, much different price point, but we have a really good friend of ours, and he works in a different creative industry, and he won $6 million for his business. And we've been working with him for probably, 5 or 7 years. And we've gotten 20 to 25 offers on this business at $3 to $3.5 million. How much do you think the business is worth?
Whatever somebody's willing to pay.
Exactly. $3 to $3.5 million. So if you do have someone that's, telling you this is what the business is worth, or you have buyers giving you that feedback in the marketplace, like listen to them and don't, stick to your guns. Don't be stubborn and say, no, I need this number. That's actually most of the time of why we see people walk away with nothing and why businesses are unsellable. It's because like they have this number, say $200,000 stuck in their head, and they've got multiple offers for $80,000. $80,000 is better than zero, which is usually what happens. So, and then the last thing I'd say is don't wait. I have so many stories where people say, hey, I'm going to wait and design an exit strategy later. Like I'm going to sell 10 years from now. So I don't need to start till 8 years from now and back. And one, we already talked about, we have no idea what's going to happen in our lives. And like even positive stuff. I mentioned at the top, I've bought and sold 5 businesses. None of those were planned ever. Like I did not see it coming, sometimes even a year in advance. And the only reason I was able to sell was because I had been running the businesses like they could be sold any day. So that's one thing, is just don't wait. And the last thing is it in that relation is like, ultimately, if you run a sellable business, it's a business that's easier to run and is oftentimes more profitable. So why would you wait and like do that for somebody else, do that for the buyer, when you could enjoy, more money, time, and freedom today for yourself? Yep. So give yourself the gift of that.
Yeah. And I did learn something about financing. I learned a lot from your book, but one of the things that was kind of a misconception for me is like the Small Business Administration, the SBA loans. You made a great point that it's the banks that give the money and they're backed by SBA versus getting it directly from the Small Business Administration. So the reason I bring that up is because, a lot of people are like, well, who has, 100,000 or 500,000 to buy my business? Well, SBA loans are a big part of this process usually.
Yeah, there's tons and tons of money. I mean, I think that's really what's driven small business sales in the last 5 years or so, but there's so much money available to buy businesses, whether it's through banks, non-banking lenders, there's individual money floating out there. That's the one thing, like we just did an update report for the business brokers that we work with. And we said, with all this stuff, crazy stuff going on in the environment, we've got inflation and all kinds of crazy things going on. Like the business for sale market is still increasing. And it's just because there's an overwhelming amount of capital that's trying to buy businesses right now. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. And when I saw your book, I was like, I got to have that because, like I told you, I took a I won't say how much it was. It was thousands and thousands of dollars. Mastermind last year on how to buy and sell businesses, and I literally learned more in the 3 hours it took me to read your book than in that 4 week mastermind. So great
Oh,
job.
thank you. Thank you.
Cool. So let's say that this is my last question. It's going to be more of a scenario based. Let's
Yep.
say I'm well, I'll put myself in the shoes. Let's say I or I have a salon. It's just me and one other person. But let's say that like I'm thinking, okay, maybe in 20 years I'll retire. What do you think the best steps are? Do you think I should hire more people? I know we've talked a little bit about this, but I want to get like an actual game plan for a lot of people.
Yeah. So the first thing I would do is document your role. So the first thing in any type of exit planning or exit strategy is like plan for a worst case scenario. And it's so grim, but it's like, let's get that stuff taken care of first. So then if you do have to sell or something happens to you in the next 6 months, we have certain things buttoned up. So first thing is document exactly what you do and how you would replace yourself. In an ideal world, so you have that other person with you, you cross-train them to do some of your role in case that happens. So that's the first thing I would do. And then once you're done that, I would invest to get a business valuation or an exit assessment done. Because after that, the path to building a valuable business is a little bit different for every business. Every business is eventually going to do all the, we'll call it in our program, we have like 8 different things. Everyone's going to do those 8 different things, but the order you do them in is going to depend on your business goals, your budget, and then obviously like just your business and industry itself. So first thing, document your role. Part 2 is cross-train somebody if you can. So then now you've got your bases covered. And then the next thing I'd have done is a business valuation or exit assessment.
Is there a particular way to document or like a software or something that you typically see sellers prefer, like whether it's Google Docs or I don't know, do you have a particular thing?
I don't. I see most of the time I see Google Docs.
Okay.
I think sometimes getting it out on paper is just easier than anything. Just don't overthink it. There's also companies that will come in and do this for you. But I think don't overthink it. Just dump it down on paper. You don't have to go into super big detail too. I've seen, and we've seen this in our processes that we've documented with our team, like your team can fill in the blanks, right? If you say like, enter someone in your customer relationship management system. You don't have to say like, open the software, sign in, all that stuff. Like they can figure out all those details. So don't overthink the minutia in it and just get it down. And yeah, whether that's Google Docs for you, voice memos, any way you can do it. So.
Okay. You mentioned valuation. So let's say I had you evaluate my company, what would that entail? And like, what would I benefit from it, even if I'm not planning to sell today?
Yeah. So typically what a business valuation will do is they'll look at your financials of your company. They'll also look at what's called the qualitative factors. So if you're going through a valuation with a reputable company, they'll do an interview with you and they'll ask, how's the company run today? And they'll ask some specific questions that either increase value, what we call value drivers, or will decrease value, which are called deal killers. Once that's done, they'll compare your business to other businesses in your industry, the same size as yours, and see what they sold for and provide a valuation range. So it'll never be like your business is worth $222,000. It'll be like it's worth between 100 and 250. What it will also do is if you're working with a company like mine, you can say, hey, what do I have to do to get this to be worth $1 million? Right? And it'll give you milestones and benchmarks. And based on that qualitative conversation, they'll say, here's what's increasing your value. Here's like the pros of your business, but here's what's decreasing in value. Like here's the things you need to work on. And that's where you then have that customized path, right? So say you don't have a marketing program. We'll use you, Jake, as the example again. So you have no marketing program and you're only generating business by referrals and it's not very consistent. So that might be a deal killer or a value decreaser that you can say, hey, that's something I can pull off really easily right now by outsourcing to Jake or someone else. And that's going to be my first path to building value. So that valuation report will give you an assessment of like, here's what you're doing really well and here's why it wouldn't sell for most. And those are like what you can work on and what you can do.
Awesome. And does your company offer valuations?
Yes, we do. So if you go to exitfactor.com/podcast, there's a link where you can, access the book. We also have a free assessment called Is Your Business Sellable, and kind of takes you through that. But we also have an offer there where you get $500 off of our business valuations and exit assessments.
Nice. And yeah, I highly recommend everyone doing that. Like I said, even if you're not planning on selling anytime soon, it's good to have those clear paths. And I'm doing the same thing in my business. I'm like, okay, if I ever want to, sell this or have my wife run it or like whatever, just finding clear points of improvement. And plus getting a second eyes, like I found this personally that, getting a second pair of eyes on my business gives me like the outside view of things because we as business operators and owners, we get so caught up in like, this is what we deal with every day. But like having somebody else look from the outside is going to, I think, provide a lot of good insights.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I look, I do the same thing too. I get caught up in my business. So I think having a third party, like just be objective in it is always helpful. So.
Yep. If nothing else, guys, definitely get this. Getting the most for selling your business. Jessica Fialkovich. It's super good. I don't normally recommend a ton of books just because most people watch my YouTube videos a lot, but this is a book that I read, like I said, here at my lake house. I read out on the porch in 3 hours yesterday morning. I couldn't put it down. So it was really, really good.
That's a big
Any,
compliment. Thank you so much, Jake.
yeah, of course. So what was the link for the $500 off the valuation? Exitfactor.com/ what?
Podcast.
Okay, and I'll put that in the description below. All right, well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all this great insight. I know this is a topic that a lot of people don't think about enough, but I think it's I know it's changed my life, the way I'm going to be doing things, and so I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jake. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, you too. All right, bye.